I am privileged and honored to be invited to spend some time with you and the wonderful leaders from around the world on the Executive Network. Just as a quick recommendation to those who are delegates, in this age of social media, please, if you can just nip up to Facebook or Twitter very briefly and just let your friends know that you're on this presentation right now and invite them to join you. I'm sure David has the link that he can provide. So the more of us that are able to partake of this, I think the merrier. So if you can do that quickly, that'd be great. In the meantime, thank you once again, David, for having me. Today, as David has mentioned, my name is Yemi Akinsiwaju. And today we'll be talking really about influencing change in tough times. And I'll be sharing keys that I have proven in my work and my experience over many, many years working in a variety of environments, in variety of business sectors, health sector, private sector, Christian ministry. I'm privileged to be a part of one of the largest of Christian organizations in the UK today. I've worked in one of the largest health sector organizations, well, the largest in its industry in the world, with major responsibilities there. So these keys really are proven in the trenches of real life, and I trust that it will be of benefit to all our listeners today. So just a little bit about me. I'm known as the Leadership Catalyst. I'm the author of 2 books, which I'll share a bit more about that with you later. I'm a trustee of the International Third World Leaders Association, which David Joe alluded to earlier. It is my privilege to be a member of that august body. It draws its membership from over 50 nations around the world, and its trustee body spans many of those nations. I'm a leadership consultant and trainer. I'm a kingdom citizen, above all. It is my privilege to be a member of the ultimate kingdom that predates all kingdoms.
Absolutely.
I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of Dayspring Consulting, a leadership training and development consultancy in the UK. And I'm the business manager of New Wine International, which is part of the New Wine Ministries, which spans, well, has influence in about 150 nations around the world through its variety of activities. So that's a little bit about me. These are the books that I've been privileged to author. And I'm also privileged that Dr. Miles Monroe, before he transitioned, actually wrote the foreword to my books. So, on to our presentation for today, really. I would say that today we live in what is called the age of the 3 C's. The first is accelerating change. The second is overwhelming competition. And the third C is tremendous complexity. Pretty much almost everywhere you turn, when you turn on the news, you hear a lot of information about what's happening in our world today. And it points to these 3 C's. In fact, someone once described the age we live in now as the decade of disruption. So pretty much everything around us is shifting. And these are simple examples of some of the changes that are happening around us, as we speak. The car that you're looking at on your screen looks like a beautiful car, looks like a standard car that you would see on our roads. That's an Audi. However, it's actually a driverless car, which means that car does not need a human to actually drive it on the streets. In case you don't realize how disruptive that is, imagine the tens of thousands, probably millions of people whose livelihoods are tied back to driving cars. whose livelihoods are perhaps there's taxi drivers, there's vehicle, they're involved in some way with the vehicle industry. This innovation in technology will cause major disruption to many, many people's lives in the days to come. In fact, I heard on the news just a couple of days ago that in a state in America, Pittsburgh, you can actually pick up a phone and call for a driverless Uber taxi. So the world around us is changing rapidly. Technological disruption. Again, this is a robot made in Japan. And many of the jobs that many people used to do, in fact, there are many people who are coming from perhaps African nations coming to the UK looking for a step up the ladder, as it were, to try and improve their economic circumstances. And the kind of roles that they're looking for when they come into Europe are the kind of roles that are being taken over by robots now, which in effect means that the draw or the drive for those people who are wanting to enter Europe, as an example, or go to America or other more developed nations, as it were, the need for their services is being rapidly overtaken by technology, which will place a significant change on how these nations will respond to the desire for migration. In fact, we already see it in the refugee or migration crisis we have in Europe. And that is before we have millions of these robots being deployed in many of these nations that will take over many of those roles that people normally would do. Another example is political disruption. We are aware, most of us who probably have been keeping our ears to the news of what happened in the UK just a couple of months ago, when the UK, against all odds, against all expectations, voted to leave the European Union. That's a major political disruption. There'll be a referendum coming up in Italy in the next few months, probably October, November. How that is going to go, no one knows. That is likely to cause even greater disruption within the EU, and that will have larger consequences for the rest of the world. Economically, again, if you're aware of what's going on in the world, in many nations, there's something called the pensions time bomb that's pretty much ticking as we speak. And many of our nations simply don't know how to handle this. And what this means simply is this: many, many people are growing older. The demographics of many nations are changing, which in effect means that, and also with the social choices that our leaders made in the early 60s, 70s, with the age of free contraception, free abortion, and all that kind of stuff, we find out that there are less young people in work today that are contributing to the pension pot who will be able to generate enough income to sustain those who are working today, or fathers who worked many, many years and put their monies into the pension pot, hoping that they would have a decent pension to sustain them in their latter years. Now, there's absolutely no solution right now that is clear to our political leaders as to how to handle this particular situation. So we have economic disruption on the horizon. Social disruption was spoken about earlier. This is the picture you're looking at on your screen is an example of Syrian refugees who are fleeing their nation, coming into Europe, going through all manner of hazards and risks to try and get to Europe. And that's causing a lot of tension within Europe. And we can see it reflected in some of the policies that are being enacted by some of these nations. So, in essence, we are living in tough times pretty much on a global scale. Now, what are the characteristics of tough times? One, it means that old paradigms are rendered obsolete. The way we used to look at the world we'll have to review how we look at the world. Old solutions are no longer viable. The old ideas that people used to propound as solutions to some of these issues and challenges, the economic ideas, the economic theories that they used to advance to solve our economic problems, are no longer working. They're being challenged and overturned by our current and daily experiences day by day. So, which means since the old ideas are not working, the old solutions are no longer viable, the old world views, the old ideas, the old paradigms have been rendered obsolete, the old theories, the old even scientific ideas that they had are being rendered obsolete by the day. It now means that there is a cry and a willingness to explore new ideas and solutions. Those are the major characteristics of tough times. It also means it's creating a realignment of priorities. So what used to be important, you know, a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, that used to inform policy decisions in our local communities. I mean, as an example, here in London, where I live, I've been involved with local schools as a school governor. And in the past, it wasn't such an issue, but now with the high birth rate, now they're finding out that they need to build many more schools to accommodate the number of children that are being born. But they've run out of space. They're having to put more children in more classes. So the priorities have changed. In the past, educational theories would tell us, well, if you have 15, 20 children per class, that is big enough for any teacher to manage. But the new realities now are such that they cannot subscribe to that old theory. So they're having to cram more children into the class. So there's a realignment of priorities, which is reflecting itself in the stresses and tensions of teachers and in the classroom and the issues they're having with discipline and the issues they're having with the educational system in the UK. So we have these snowball effects. So there's a realignment of priorities. And that's just one little example just within the educational arena. And what I've just explained in the educational arena pretty much happens in the health arena. It happens in the political arena. It happens in the economic arena. Pretty much everywhere you look, there is some kind of tension that is developing, or we're going through a full-blown, crisis in many of those sectors in our different nations around the world. And yet, the beauty of it is this. These tensions, these tough times now create opportunities. They create opportunities, they create openings for new leaders with fresh solutions, with fresh ideas, with fresh perspectives on how we can address these challenges. Since the old ideas and the old solutions aren't working, and the old leaders' ideas are being rendered obsolete, now people are willing to listen to ideas pretty much from any quarter, which to me is a great thing, because to my mind, these tough times create opportunities for you who are listening to me right now. In whatever sphere you operate in whatever arena of influence you're operating in, these tough times create tremendous opportunities for you. And I'm certainly hoping that by the time we finish our engagement together today, that you will see that it's not all doom and gloom, and the picture that is painted of the crisis that is facing our world is also a time of tremendous opportunity. In fact, in the Chinese language, the same word that is used for crisis is the same word that they use for opportunity. And that really is the mindset that I would like us to approach this emerging scenario that we live in right now. So, as a leader, It is now time to maximize your leadership influence as what I call yeast. Now, the yeast principle for me has been the mainstay of the approach that I utilize in deploying my own personal influence in the different arenas of life in which I operate. And as David Joe alluded to mention earlier, I've been privileged to serve in a variety of opportunities, in a variety of environments at the highest level. And so I know that these principles and these ideas work. So what do I mean by maximizing your leadership influence as yeast? The first thing is to try and understand what is yeast. Now the diagram you're looking at here is an image of yeast as a diagram. Yeast is a living object, is a living cellular organism. In the diagram here, you can see it has a length of about 10 micrometers and a width of 5 micrometers, which means it is very, very, very small. It is pretty tiny, okay? In fact, it is estimated that you need about probably 3 billion yeast particles to fill a sugar cube. Okay, so that is pretty small. That's pretty tiny. And yet, the power of yeast is this. Its presence is purposeful. Whenever you see yeast introduced into any environment, it is introduced with purpose. Yeast has many, many uses. It has many, many benefits. But the beauty of yeast is this. Despite its size, it is not intimidated by the size of the dough. And what do I mean by that? Yeast, although it's a little microcelled, unicelled organism, it is used in baking bread. It is used in the production of wine. It is used in the production of biofuels. It serves a multiplicity of purposes. And so it is introduced into its particular environment. If it's to bake bread, it enters that environment with a particular assignment in mind. If it is to make beer, they use it in the production of beer, it enters that environment with a particular assignment in mind. And so, in the same way as leaders, it is important that we enter any particular arena of influence with a set mind, with a set purpose, with a set assignment of what it is we want to accomplish in that environment. I find out that sometimes many of us fall into jobs, we fall into careers, we fall into situations unexpectedly. Circumstances kind of lead us, as it were, into those arenas. Be that as it may, I think it's important that once we enter that environment, to study that environment, to decipher how best you can bring your influence to bear positively on that environment, and then use that to create a sense of purpose for yourself in that environment. So, secondly, yeast is not intimidated by the size of the dough that it enters. You need a little yeast to cause a big lump of dough to rise. So the yeast is not intimidated by the size of the dough. You know, sometimes when I speak to individuals, either when I'm in training, when I'm in a training environment, or I'm in a coaching relationship and I'm having chats with people, one of the things that I find out often is I ask them, you know, what's happening in their world, and they give me stories about, you know, poor leadership. They give me stories about the dysfunction that they're experiencing in their environment, and inevitably I always ask, what are you doing about it? What, you know, role are you playing? How come you're not the manager in that environment? And almost without fail, the people who give me those horror stories about their environment come up with this excuse, and they say they're not willing to take on the responsibility of leadership because of the stresses of leadership. because they look at the stress that leaders seemingly go through and they say, well, I don't want any of that in my life. Therefore, I will not attempt to be a leader in that environment. Unfortunately, the problem with that approach is this. When you have the wrong leader in position, their dysfunction becomes your dysfunction. I will repeat that. When you have the wrong leader in position, their dysfunction becomes your dysfunction. The dysfunction multiplies your stresses in that environment. And so if you have the skill, if you have the ability, if you have the capacity to contribute to leadership in that environment, then I want to encourage you to take up the mantle of leadership. Now, this raises an important question, and it is people who say that they don't want to take up the mantle of leadership think that they have to have the title of leader in that environment before they can become the leader. And that is a misconception. You do not need the position of, of a title to become the leader in that environment. And I think that's absolutely critical to understand. You become the leader in that environment by taking up the mantle of responsibility, by taking up the choice to respond adequately to the challenges of that environment. So I'll pause there for a minute and ask David Joe, are there any questions that are arising from our audience about what I've shared so far?
Well, yes, I'm sure there are some ideas or questions popping up in the minds of our audience. And I suppose this is the time to either write them on our chat facility, or if you would like to ask directly, I can bring you on as a speaker and then you can air your question, which would be very good for the learning purposes for all of our delegates. So at the moment, there's none that's been written, but I'm sure uh, our friends are putting their thoughts together and they can
Okay.
then ask shortly. So yeah,
Excellent.
let's
Okay.
carry on.
So we'll carry on then. So as I mentioned earlier, yeast is versatile in its uses and in its benefits. Yeast serves in baking bread, making wine, making beer. Yeast serves in medicine as a health supplement. Yeast is subtle in its influence, but its impact is undeniable. I think that's the area that I really want to emphasize on just for a little bit. There are many people who believe that they have to make a lot of noise to become the leader in the environment. Not so. I think the important thing is to learn how to navigate your environment effectively, learn what makes that environment, what I would call the critical success factors in your particular environment, and then learn how to leverage those factors to bring change and transformation in your environment. So, as an example of what I mean there, in my work with a school, I recognize that the critical success factors for success in any school is the ability of the teachers to teach effectively. So, although it wasn't within my purview as a school governor, normally what you do is you go into meetings, you discuss the decisions or the policies that the head teacher wants to make, and you then give advice on the ideas that they're given for, changing or transforming the school. Now, that would be my formal role. But when I talk about yeast being subtle in its influence, what did I do differently? What I did was I researched books and materials that were of particular benefit to teachers. And I actually purchased the book and gave it to key teachers in that school and invited them to read it, to learn it, to study it. And so what they did then was, those that I had that engagement with, they read it, they enjoyed it, they loved the ideas in it, and they then started sharing it with each other, with other ones who they had influence on in the school, and began to adapt the ideas from these books into their own teaching practice. As a result, I'm pleased to say that the performance of that school went from being one of the lowest in its local authority to one of the top 3 in the local authority. And in fact, the particular course that I had responsibility for as a governor, our results put us in the top 5% of the results in the entire nation, the United Kingdom. So that is what I mean by yeast being subtle in its influence, but its impact undeniable. I didn't make a lot of noise about what it is I was doing or how I was doing it. I just recognized what the critical success factor in that environment was, studied how I could bring change to that particular success factor, and I put in place a very simple plan to help bring change, and it got results. So in the same way, in whatever environment you're in, I believe that you can bring tremendous change, tremendous positive impact, just by looking at that environment, studying your environment, and look at the subtle ways in which you can leverage change and bring positive and undeniable impact. Now, one other element is this. A yeast cell works with other yeast cells to impact its environment. Suffice it to say that the days of the Lone Ranger is over. So to a large extent, this is an opportunity for me to say thank you to David for the work you're doing with the Executive Network. This is a fantastic representation of what I'm trying to share here about working with other yeast cells to impact the environment. We all have our different skills, different abilities, different giftings, different strengths. Bringing it together can actually help change our world dramatically. Now, sometimes there are people who have great ideas, tremendous ideas, but somehow they have this idea that, oh, I have to leverage that idea by myself to be able to bring the change, because for whatever reason, either they want the credit for themselves, or they believe that other people will steal their idea, or they believe that what they have to offer, that it takes only their own ability to be able to achieve it. All of those 3 ideas are a misconception. For us to get the leverage and the impact that we want in this rapidly changing world, it is important for us to cultivate the mindset of interdependence. A yeast cell, like I said, one yeast cell is micrometers, micrometers in size. But by coming together with other yeast cells, they're able to impact tremendous change in the dough that they're putting. They're able to impact, a big vat, for instance, of wine, beer, for it to ferment. So, but the key is the leverage, the network, they cultivate interdependence, they cultivate partnerships, they cultivate strategic alliances, they cultivate creative partnerships that are able to bring the change that we require in our different arenas of influence. The example that I gave earlier, I'm not a teacher, so I couldn't influence the school directly, but by working in partnership with those who are able to influence that environment, we were able together to bring change that benefited the school, that benefited the children, and benefited our community. So it is important as leaders that we begin to cultivate partnerships, trusted partnerships, where we can bring our skills together, particularly as kingdom citizens. And I will emphasize that because we're working in a world now where the paradigm shift is happening right before us, where our world needs kingdom ideas to bring change. Worldly ideas, ideas of the past are failing by the day. So we need ideas from kingdom citizens that are connected to the mind of the ultimate king to bring fresh insights into the ideas, into the challenges of our world today. And as we bring those fresh ideas, we must cultivate a sense of interdependence, a sense of partnership to leverage our strengths together to bring change and transformation to our different spheres of influence.
I don't know if I can just interject very briefly.
Yes, please.
I have a question here.
Yes, please.
And that says, what stops us from speaking out sometimes? So it was one of our leaders that's asked that question. And the question again is, what stops us from speaking out sometimes?
Okay. Well, that's an excellent question. Thank you so much for the questioner. There are a variety of reasons that stops us from speaking out. I think the first is this: fear. What do I mean by fear? One, fear that your idea is not good enough. There are many people who underplay or underestimate the power of their own ideas. Sometimes there's a thinking that, oh, if my idea was so good, somebody else would have thought of it. But not necessarily so. I mean, I just gave an example of helping to transform the results of a school just by purchasing books to assist. Now, surely one might say that buying books in a school is no particularly great idea. You wouldn't say it's original in quotes. But when deployed within the context of understanding that for that environment, it was a critical success factor for bringing change. As simple as it was a fresh solution to an age-old problem. So I think that's one of the things that holds us back from actually speaking up. The idea that the notion that the idea that I bring to the table is not good enough. That's the first thing. The second thing is the ability to share our ideas in a relevant way. Now, I find out, especially when engaging with kingdom citizens, that we tend to think in religious terms. And our language tends to be a religious language. And that religious language does not necessarily translate as well or as effectively in the different arenas of life in which we operate. So the key really is to learn how to take your fantastic kingdom ideas and package them in a language that is relevant to the sphere of influence in which you operate. I mean, as an example, I was in an environment a couple of days ago. I was invited to speak to a group of young leaders from a variety of fields, some of them from banking, some from marketing, some from public relations, some from education, young people, you know, making waves in their environment. And I was brought in to share some leadership insights with them. Now, all I shared with them were kingdom principles, but I shared those principles in a way in which was relevant. I shared those principles in a way in which they could take those ideas and deploy them in their own contemporary environments. And someone said to me, you know, the ideas that you just shared today, even though they're kingdom principles, but you share them in such a way that they would actually be going on radio. We'll be doing some radio interviews over the next few days. And the exact same ideas that I shared was what we were going to be sharing to their world, but using contemporary language. So I believe that is one of the things that keeps us from sharing our thoughts and our ideas in the different areas where we operate. That's the second major reason. We need to learn to calibrate how we communicate our information. Great ideas, if delivered in a mediocre way, will be rejected or ignored. I'll repeat that. Great ideas, when delivered in a mediocre way, will be rejected or ignored. So what we need to do is learn how to communicate more effectively in a language of the environment in which we operate. So those are two major reasons. The third reason is people fear opposition to their ideas. The fact of the matter is this: in whatever environment you are, there are people who are already perhaps acknowledged as the experts in that environment. There's a status quo, as it were. So when you bring your fresh ideas to that environment, you can expect that there will be some pushback from people who do not necessarily subscribe to your ideas. Now, the fact that their own ideas have not been working, or their own ideas have been rendered obsolete by the realities of the present day, is neither here nor there as far as they are concerned in their mind, because they now see you as this upstart who is coming to displace them in the pecking order of that environment. So the key is to understand that opposition to your ideas is part of the process of change. In fact, there's a model in management where they share that to bring change, you have to go through a number of processes. You know, where you have to, it's called the Kurt-Lewin model of change, where you go through freeze, change, embed your change, and then refreeze. But we won't go into all of that. But essentially what it means is you will encounter some opposition to your ideas, accept that as part of the course. The important thing is that you are convinced that your ideas are right, you have a full conviction, and you understand how your ideas will bring change and transformation, and you're willing to stand by your ideas. Now, it doesn't mean that you're being obtuse in your ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're being unrealistically stubborn. But if you're clear in your mind about how these ideas will bring change, you're willing to stand by the strength of your own convictions. So understand that opposition will come, but accept that as part of the course. And in fact, I will allude to that as part of this presentation. So if this question is a great question, it's actually preempted that point I was going to make later in a presentation together. So those are the three key elements that I think hold us back from actually speaking out in whatever environment we are. Is that helpful to our listener?
Well, I can tell that the questioner is definitely excited about the answers. So thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
My
Okay.
friend. Thank you.
So moving on quickly to our next point. As a leader who operates under the yeast principle, we must be totally committed to the process of change. I mentioned that earlier. And what I mean by this is that we cannot enter the arena of change with a half-hearted attitude. What you have to offer is too important. What our community, our nations, our world needs from you is too important for us to approach it with a lackadaisical attitude. It's too important for us to approach it with a mindset of uh, what they call que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. We must be totally committed to the process of change. And part of that process, which I mentioned earlier, is that we accept heat as part of the process. When you introduce yeast into dough, for it to become bread, the necessity is that that bread must go into the oven and that bread must experience heat. And it is in the process of heat that the yeast actually degrades. The yeast degrades and releases its fullest capacity. It releases its maximum influence into the bread. It is the heat process that releases its maximized influence in the bread. So, as a leader in whatever sphere you're operating, it is important to accept a total commitment to the process of change. There are no half-hearted measures. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges we have as kingdom citizens today. I make bold to say that there's a saying that a rolling stone gathers no moss. And that is one of the things that you find out with many kingdom citizens. We go into different environments, we find a bit of turbulence, and we bail out. We go into environments that are tough because they're not, in quote, kingdom environments, and then we bail out. But they forget that the very reason, the very essence of you being there as a kingdom citizen is to bring light into the dark place. The essence of our being there in that environment is to bring transformation into that environment. So what we need to do as leaders is have a complete mind shift, a total commitment to the process of transformation. In fact, when you look at our ultimate example, we know his story. We know that he came to bring transformation to our world. And the process he would need to go through to bring the transformation was not a particularly pleasant one for him as an individual. And we know the mental agony he went through. We know the physical agony he went through to bring the transformation. That we have a portion of the text that says to us, uh, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame. So he had a very, very clear objective in mind. He had a very clear vision of what it is he wanted to do. He had a very clear idea of what transformation he wanted to bring. And he knew that that transformation was going to be undertaken in an environment that was tough. He modeled how to influence change in tough times. We may remember that he influenced change in an environment where the nation was under military subjugation by foreign power. He brought change in an environment where his ideas were totally opposed by the political and the social and the religious leaders of his day. He brought change in an environment where the community were fickle in their responses to him. One day they were for him, the next day they were against him. One day they were excited about the transformation he was bringing in their lives. The next day they were keen to see him destroyed. So, and yet, in the midst of these tough times and in the midst of this tough environment, he was absolutely committed to the process of change because he knew that the change he was bringing was well worth it. And that is the same conviction that we need to bring into our arenas of influence. That the change and the transformation and the influence that I'm bringing to this environment, it is well worth it. And I must be committed to the process of change. I must be willing to learn what it takes to bring change in that environment. I must be willing to confront the status quo. And I must be willing to accept heat, challenge, opposition, ridicule, whatever kind of challenge that you need to overcome to bring a change. You must be convinced in your own mind that it is well worth it for you to go through that process. So, if you embrace all of these ideas, then I leave you with this final key. It is found in the ultimate book of leadership influence. Call it Romans 8:19. And that passage simply says, all of creation is waiting for your manifestation as a child of God. All of creation, your environment, your community, your family, your workplace, your ministry, your organization, your particular sphere of influence is waiting for your manifestation as the influencer and the leader you were born to be. On that note, I invite David Joe to step back in. If there are any more questions, please feel free.
Yes, I'm right back here. Thank you so much for that exquisite presentation. Definitely, we saw the reality of change. It's all around us, even right where we are, right in our living room, right in our bedrooms. However, we must indeed take the yeast approach to bringing about influence that is not loud but effective. I think that's what our speaker has spoken about. Effective change, effective influence that is not brash, that is not loud, but the one that recognizes that change is not always accepted. And so there must be conviction and persistence to see the change come to life. Thank you very much, my very dear brother, my friend, and colleague. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. And I love what you said, that we need effective partnership, creative partnership. Why? And I think I've echoed that a few times on this platform, that one cannot multiply. One is too small a number to effect change. Ultimately, we must be able to connect with people who see with different perspective, but with the same kind of purpose to bring about the change that can become widespread and far-reaching. And I think that is what uh, our speaker was alluding to much earlier. So I want to say a very big thank you again. I'm just looking through to see if anyone is asking a question, but I could see at the same time Sam Ulama said a yeast cell in partnership with other yeast cells have a greater impact on its environment. I think that was just echoing your voice. I could also see other participants just echoing your voice and really agreeing with that insight. And I'm sure that everyone can see that we cannot stand idly by. We must be involved in the change that we want to see. And of course, you can connect with Yemi Akeshiwaju through Facebook, through Twitter, and LinkedIn. You can bring him to your organizations, right where you are, and they'll be willing to serve you. So, on behalf of everyone, I know it's 10 o'clock right where I am. I want to say a big thank you to our speaker, Leadership Catalyst, Yemi Akeshiwaju.
Thank you ever so much.
You can be sure that we will be calling on you shortly after now.
It will be my privilege and pleasure to serve you and
absolutely.
a wonderful audience.
We might as well bring you down to Manchester on one of our corporate events.
It will be my joy.
Yes, we're looking forward to that. I would definitely make you aware of public events so that we can plan well ahead, and we can meet with our audience face to face. And the ones in Manchester, we have other folks. As a matter of fact, we have people who joined us from Canada, from Czech Republic, and from different parts of UK.
Hello, everyone.
Yes, they're all saying hello. We do have people joining us from the United States as well, and from Philippines from time to time. But the key point is we want to see ourselves as agents of change. We are not people who stand idly by. At the same time, we're not people who are unruly. We are strategic about change. As a matter of fact, we choose to become the change that we wish to see.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, sir.
Thank
you to all our friends. Yes, same here, sir. To Elizabeth, to George, to Adisha, to Olabode, to Sam, to Buki, to EK, to Bolaji. Thank you all, and see you next time. Can I also say that next time, Ayo, one of us, will be speaking on workplace ethics and influence. That is a session you don't want to miss. So remind as many people who are having difficulties in the workplace to come along, because you will be seeing insights from someone who is doing it, who has proven track record in the workplace. And that will be very useful for all of us to help us transform things in our workplaces and to become the agent of change as yeast, as Mr. Yemi Akeshiwaju has just spoken. Let me also say very big hello to Mr. Dare for being with us. God bless you all, and see you next week. Thank you very much, my brother, once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. God bless. Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Bye, everyone. God bless. Have a great week.
You too.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. And good night. Thank you all. Good night to everyone, and God bless you.